Hello, my name is Anya Muzar-Clark. This is my sketchbook talk through for my final major project in my Level 3 Extended Diploma in Art Design and Communication course. My chosen pathway is fine art, specifically mixed media, and my theme is resplendence. Okay, so to start with, we've just got a sort of mind map, kind of thinking about different words that I might want to base my project on. My ideas all sprouted from almost an idea from past projects. I knew that I really enjoyed working with lots of different mediums. So I've got things like relief, I've got tactile, so things you can touch and feel. I've got lots of textures going on. And I know that I particularly like making pretty things, which might sound a little vain, but I always like when they look impressive and they look really fabulous. So I think that was something it was a really nice way for me to kind of start getting into my plan. My first official page, I decided to go for a primary research page. It's one of those things where it's the start of a project, you're a little bit lost, you haven't quite found the theme or the direction you want to go in sometimes, so I thought getting a bit of research done was a great way for me to kind of get stuck in. I knew I already wanted to look at colour, so I found a splodge of oil from a car in our college car park, and I thought that would be great, so I took a picture of it, and then I did a little bit of detail looking into how oil spills are just like super organic and they're very movable, and I just thought it was a great way to look into colour from something that's so like simple or that you just find on the random floor of a car park. As you can see, I also tried to see if I could mimic the way it moves with watercolour. I also tried coloured pencil just to see if I could do a little bit of illustration to kind of get myself into the project. I also had a look at printing on acetate, which you can also see in my plan, which I added after. It was very simple. You just put it through the printer, and I put a picture of light reflecting because that looked a little bit like an oil spill to me, and then I printed it, and I thought that was a really cool thing, and it's really great if you forget to do a background, you can just stick it on top, so I thought that was really helpful. So after this primary research is when I began to think more on colour and movement and pieces looking really radiant and really textural and beautiful, and that led me to the word resplendent, which is essentially something that is gorgeous and quite expensive looking. So this page here is a little bit of a mix of experiments. So I wanted to re-look at some portraiture work because I know that that's something from the last project that I really enjoyed. So all I did was just get a reference from Pinterest, and then I just tried to sketch it out as best I could. On this page I also had a look at beading, which is something that's almost been in my mind for quite a few months now. I thought, oh, that would be really fun to try. And also a bit of embroidery and just trying a bit more textural pieces. So I think last time I tried relief, so that was quite like, it was textural, you could run your hands over it, it was a little bit 3D, and I really enjoyed that. So I thought this time I could try something different, but still along those lines. So on that note of beading, I thought I'd give it a go. I wasn't entirely set on doing it because in my mind I had the same relief that I had done last project that I really wanted to continue because it was something I really enjoyed. But in the back of my head was, let's try something new. So I kept it simple and I just went with some fruits, they were quite easy shapes, so they were quite rounded, which I thought was not too bad. I have here the physical copies of what I made, which they look much better in person, I think, because you can really feel them. And you can see how shiny they are on camera as well. But they were really fun, and what I really liked was that they were quite thick. I liked how hefty they were. It just felt like so much time and effort went into it, and I think that's what I really appreciate with artwork is when it looks like it's had a lot of love and attention. I was quite impressed with the back as well because I hadn't done sewing in a long time, and usually the back is all jumbled and ugly, but I think it's not too bad if you ask me. For my first artist, I chose to go with Friedrich Hunterwasser, I think that's how you say his name. What I really loved about his work is he really related weirdly. I found lots of artists, and I found it surprisingly easy to find some that included portraiture and colour, or portraiture and movement, or like bees and colour. Like, it was quite a good combination, so I found lots and lots of really interesting, helpful artists. So what I really liked about him was how he took almost classic landscapes and he turned them into these crazy, wiggly, like colourful pieces, and it was how he doesn't just see a field as a field, he sees it as almost like an ocean of grass, you know, he sees it differently than everybody else, and I thought that was really, really lovely. I also really, really love how he hides portraiture in his work, and it's almost hidden with like these sort of lines and wiggles, and I just think it's really, really fabulous. So his use of colour and movement got me thinking a little bit about marbling. So marbling is where you drop little bits of marbling liquid into water, and then you can swish it around with a pin or a bit of hair, and then you dip a bit of paper in. So I had a good go at it. These didn't turn out super great. I think this was one of the only ones where I managed to get the proper like marbling look, where it almost like expands like this. I really, really loved doing this because it was such a simple, and it was really, really fun to do. But I think it's not something that I think I would have put towards my project because it's just quite flat. But what I really, really did like about it is how organic and how the colours would swish together. And I thought that's something that I do really like. So colour-wise and composition-wise, it's what I really, really enjoy. I just don't think I would have used this technique again, or I wouldn't have put it towards my FMP, but it's definitely something that's a really entertaining thing to do. Kathleen Ryan creates these really big sculptural pieces that they look a bit like crystal, but they're like glass beads. And what my favourite thing about her is she uses fruits and she makes them look disgusting and mouldy. But because of the way she does it with these really beautiful, shiny, glistening beads, it turns something that's typically ugly into something that's really, really beautiful. And I just think it's such a clever idea. Kathleen Ryan creates these really big sculptural pieces that they look a bit like crystal, but they're like glass beads. Okay, so for my next experiment, I wanted to have a look at a bit of embroidery. As I tried my beading, and it took a long, long time to make such a tiny little thing, I thought maybe using two different things, putting them together, might make it a little bit less time, and it would give more of a 3D multimedia sort of thing to create. So I had a look at using jute, and I would use this really, really thick embroidery thread, and this was super, super satisfying to do, and I really, really enjoyed this. So here is a little piece that I made that has a real mix. So I've done lots of different colours because I thought that was just a way to kind of experiment with colour like my previous chosen artists. I also had a look at continuing that beading, adding bigger beads, adding little ones, adding small embroidery thread, adding super thick rainbow ones. These were a bit more difficult because if you pull too hard, they're a little bit like felt, so they would almost just thin, and then they'd snap. So I had to go really, really slow and be super, super careful not to pull it too tight. And then I also had a look at testing bits of like tassels and bits of sewn together fabric. So it's a really nice jumble, and I think it gives a really nice look. I have a bit of a mini artist research here as well. So this image here is by an artist called Ali Snow, and as you can see, she has the similar sort of circles, which I have magpied and used on my work. And what I really like about her work is she's a little bit ocean themed, so it's a bit like coral, and these look a bit like little crustaceans that are on rocks, which I really, really like. So it's a bit of a nod to her and a bit of a nod to ocean life. I have a bit of a mini artist research here as well. So this image here is by an artist called Ali Snow, and as you can see, we have 2 pages. So on this page, we just have a bit of a statement that I have decided to follow the path of fine art. This is mainly really stemmed from the fact that I like creating pieces that don't necessarily have a purpose behind them, but they occasionally have a moral or a slight meaning to why I've created them or what they're for. So that's just what I've done on this page, very, very simply. On this page here, it's a look into different careers that I can go into with my knowledge of art. I've linked a few extra ones, mainly because I'm not completely sure on what I want to do yet, but I just wanted to make sure I got all of them down. So art-wise, I think university is what I'd really, really enjoy doing. I'm not completely sure what I'd like to do there, but I think fine art is something that is a good way to kind of get into it, and then I can still do lots of different things, and I can still try lots of different mediums and techniques, and I think that would be a really good thing. And then career-wise, currently I'm a gymnastics teacher, which I really, really enjoy, but I'm not sure if I'd like to do that in the long run, or whether it could be something that I do after my normal job, so almost like a mini part-time job. But long term is definitely teaching. So I really, really love the idea of primary teaching. It's a great segue from gymnastics teaching because I teach roughly children that age. But what I would really, really enjoy most is teaching secondary school, but specialise as a art teacher, because it's a way for me to kind of stay creative, but show people all these different techniques and get to work with different things and really experiment with anything that I'd like to think of, you know, and I get to help other people do that as well, which I think would be a really, really lovely thing to do. Okay, so as we get further in the project, we're getting a bit more into the nitty gritty. So here I've got my printed project proposal slideshow. I've also got my peer review, so it has a positive and things I can improve on. I really like how I've presented this one. I've continued the page because I wasn't really sure what to do for the background because I thought it might be a bit distracting, but you can have the link to this on the Google Classroom, but it's basically got all of my pages. Each one of my pages, if you look closely or if you notice, match the content. Okay, so here we have another bit of primary research. This is from my visit to the National Gallery. So I've made my book a little bit like a little frame. So if you pull this one over, I've just included my favourite pictures that I saw. So what I really, really like about these is that they're super classic images. They're not too flashy, they're simple, but they're just so full of like life and colour. And what I really, really like is how the fabric has been created and how it's been painted and how there is small flecks of gold that really, really make everything just look so beautiful. And even the unfinished pieces, because there's unfinished pieces at the National Gallery, are just so well painted and they're just beautiful and they're so smooth. And I think I just absolutely love this kind of style of old painting. Okay, so on that note of the more classic paintings, I've had a look at this artist called Suzanne Jongman. So I absolutely love her. I think she's super, super cool. So she creates modernized photos of Renaissance style paintings. So these are all modern women, but they're posed in a way to be these old style oil paintings. So they've got the head coverings or they've got the very evangelical halos, and it's so beautiful. And I just love the way she does it with the black background. It's just so striking, and I really, really enjoyed looking at this artist. Cyanotype. So this is almost an example of what it looks like. So you can either use paper or you can paint the cyanotype like ink or paint onto the fabric, and then all you have to do is put something that will block some of the light, put it under the ultraviolet light, and it will expose the rest of it but not what's underneath. And I think that is just awesome. Like the science behind it is just brilliant. So I just had a look at trying to do a bit of lace. So it's typically done with nature, which I've done here, but as I'm not really looking at nature specifically, I had a bit more look in depth at fabric instead, and I really, really like how it's caught each individual net of this lace, and it's just a super duper sort of experiment. It's not necessarily something that I'll be continuing with in this project, but I'm really, really glad I've had a go at it because it's opened my mind up to trying new things and just ruling out what I do want to do and what I don't want to do. And I think that's really, really helpful in a project like this because it's such a broad category. So having lots of experiments is really helpful to kind of narrow your ideas down and really get what you want from it. So my next artist, Jennifer Lamontagne, I really, really love her use of embroidery and how she really, really packs her images with the beads, with the embroidery, with the different patterns as well. It's lots of wiggles, and I love the movement she creates with her work. With Jennifer, what I really, really love is the movement and how there's lots of different patterns and ideas in her backgrounds and in her images. So it creates such a movement and such a life and a vibrancy that I really, really enjoy. And from Suzanne Jongman, I'd like to take the idea of doing a Renaissance-inspired portraiture. Or we've got other artists like Hunterwasser, which I really, really enjoy the hidden portraiture and the colours. So I think each artist has really, really helped create my project because I've taken a little bit from each one and the bit I really like the most, and it's helped me create my own work, which I really, really like. And another artist I've also magpied a little bit from is Sarah Guire. So what I really love about her work is how camp it is. So she creates these slightly religious looking figures with super crazy colourful backgrounds, and it's almost a bit of humour in her work because it's Lady Gaga or it's different characters from different shows, which I just think is such a clever and such a fun idea to create. And as a bit of an experiment to kind of link with her is I wanted to use a bit more colour when I'm creating my embroidery. So what I had a look at is dyeing my fabric. I just used watercolour. I just wanted to keep it simple, and I just kind of painted it on, let it dry, and then I sewed into it, and I thought that gave a really, really fabulous effect. I wanted to have a bit of a look into more portraiture, because I've had a lot of look into embroidery and beading and colour, but what I hadn't really delved into was portraiture itself. So looking at Jenny Saville, I chose her because she used that soft colour palette that I liked in previous artists, but I also liked that her use of soft features to kind of display emotion. She's used soft colours, soft features, soft blending, soft highlights. It's all very soft, and it's light, and it's just so beautiful, and it really, really displays that emotion, and I think that's what I'd like to create. So I've done a bit of an illustration. It's not completely how I wanted it to look, but I think colour-wise it's quite spot on to her sort of wavy, wheelie, organic sort of way of painting. So that's what I really, really enjoyed. But okay, so with all of this behind me, I decided to do a photography shoot, and this was inspired by Suzanne Jongman. So I chose a black background. I used a shawl that I found in the fabric bin, which was quite handy, and I used one of my classmates, and we just took these photos which are inspired by Renaissance images. So we wanted to get that emotion and that almost a little bit of a pained expression. Originally, this was only meant to be an experiment, but because of how the images came out, I was just so pleased. They were exactly how I wanted them to look, and I really wasn't expecting them to. So I knew I wanted to create my final piece from this image, and I wanted to use and incorporate embroidery, beading, colour, portraiture, all of this. So what I did was I chose my favourite image. These are my favourite ones. These were ones that we attempted, which are traditional poses that were done in Renaissance photos, but they just weren't giving the same emotion that I wanted them to. So I've chosen this image here of Fliss looking almost quite sad or quite just very numb, and I just thought it was really, really beautiful, and you can see so much emotion in it. So I knew I wanted to use this image as the base, but now it was more deciding what am I actually going to do with this image. So if you pull up here, we can see my plan. So I didn't know whether I wanted to do a different shaped background or whether I wanted to keep it rectangular. I was thinking about doing possibly a circle, and then the outside could be gold, and that was it was a little bit inspired by a halo, but I decided to keep it more rectangular, just like this one, because I just thought this image was absolutely fabulous. So I kind of just selected which ones I wanted to do. There's not much build up to creating my ideas, mainly because I feel sometimes I can't switch off my brain, and when I think of a good idea, I can't, it's almost like it just pops into my head, and I just wanted to show that there is a thought process behind it, and there is time that is taken to me refining my ideas. So what I've done here is I've just shown the different ideas on how to kind of create my idea that was in my head. So I didn't know whether I wanted to use real fabric or paint this image or bead it. I didn't know whether I wanted to do beading on the background or embroidery on the background. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I just knew exactly what materials I wanted to use, and then I had to think about where I wanted them. So I kind of narrowed it down to doing a background that was similar to this piece here, but I wasn't super sure on the colour because I thought this would be a little bit almost too much and it would take away from the face. So I knew that I wanted to do the embroidery and beading in the background, and then I thought about making the face a little bit more simple just so you can really get the effect of the background. So I thought about doing more smaller embroidered features, and then I could add a few gold or a few beads just to add a little bit of depth and a little bit of detail so that it can link in with the background. On this side, I've had a look more on colourways that I would chosen. I think the black was a good idea because it would have been super similar to this image, and again, I was quite obsessed with this image. I had a look at pinks, but I wasn't super sure, mainly because Fliss just didn't really give off this pink vibe. I liked the idea because she is warmer colours in her skin tone. She has more like pinky undertones, but I just didn't think that pink was the right choice. So I had a bit of an idea in mind, thinking about aura, which I get into in my next pages, but I also thought that there was lots of things I could link the blues and the greens to, being her eyes are a bluish green. I liked the idea that my previous artists used nature and they used water and ocean life to inspire their pieces, and I thought that was a great way to link in having a more monochrome blue simple background. So after selecting blue, I really wanted to hammer it in, and there was something that I had heard of called aura. So aura is almost like your inner self. It's a reflection of who you are in a colour. And so what we did is to see what Fliss would be, is we put her through a little bit of an aura test, which you can do anywhere online. So there are different colours. So red could be energy and passion. There's yellow that can be happiness and intelligence. And it's just a little link to who you are inside. And it's almost a bit like an inner beauty. And it's a really, really interesting concept. So we did her test and it ended up being blue. And I just thought, all the signs are there. We have to do blue now. It's all worked together. It matches her eyes, matches my previous artist. It is her aura colour. Blue is the only choice. So I just thought it was such a perfect coincidence. Another thing I did also want to touch on is sustainability and ethics. So this is super, super important in this day and age with our artwork. We want to make sure that what we're creating is ethical, so that we're getting consent from our models, we're using our own references, we're not taking from other artists, and that we're making sure that our work is the best it can be, and that includes ethically. So sustainability wise, I also had a look at using pre-loved fabrics and using beads from our bead box before buying new ones. And when we did buy new ones, I had a bit of an idea to use more glass beads than plastic beads, so you could reduce the amount of plastic that was being consumed. So I just had a bit of a look on how to make my piece as good as it can be, whilst being sustainable and whilst being morally good. Okay, so here we get into how will I create a final piece. So what I've done is I've just taken an image of some blue fabric and cut out the image of Fliss that I wanted to use and just stuck them together just so I could visualize what it could look like. I've done a few little patterns just so I can kind of get the idea of what I'm creating. So there's only really 3 aspects in my piece. There's the portrait here, there's the background, and there's the shawl. So I had 3 separate ideas for each one. So for the background, I knew that I wanted to go for that piece that I created on the jute with the lots of different materials and the beads and the buttons and the embroidery. And I wanted it to be really organic, the way that there was swirls. I didn't want there to be a set pattern. So that was my plan for the background. And as I already had created something similar, I knew that that's exactly how I'm going to create it, just with a different colorway. The face, I knew that I wanted to use regular embroidery thread. So I wanted to use dark around the edges, so almost create a bit of a paint by numbers. So I was going to do a painting background just to kind of know where each colour of the embroidery thread was going to go, and so that I could keep the shape there just so I know where I'm going, so I can keep all of the colours and the depth there. The shawl was probably the trickiest thing. I was debating on what to do. What I really didn't want was for my portrait and my background to be competing. So one idea was to just paint it white, paint on these pleats so that it was almost a bit of a break. But what I didn't want is this to be super 3D, this to be super 3D, and this to be completely flat, as it would actually be the opposite way round if you saw it in person. This is essentially the most 3D part of the image. So I had the idea to do a fabric, and I wanted to do a real fabric that I could glue on, and then I could almost create the pleats and pin them down and then wait for the glue to dry and then pull the pins out so that it would almost stay in that pleated position and it would give a more 3D vibe. I thought this was actually a brilliant idea because if there's any rough edges of the jupe in the background, this would disguise it a little bit. So that was my plan on how I was going to create that. Now that I have officially finished my piece, here is how I created it. Now there's a lot of writing in here. Obviously you can't read it in this video, but I've added the pictures. So I essentially projected the image of Fliss so that I could get the correct anatomy and that it wouldn't be super wonky onto the A1 canvas, just so it would be correct. And also I drew patches of where the highlights and the shadows were so that I knew where to paint each colour as well. Once I did that, very simply, I just painted the background. It wasn't my favourite, mainly because the acrylic dried a lot darker than I originally wanted it to, but I was quite impressed with myself nonetheless, as I had never actually painted a portrait before, so I'm quite surprised at how it went. I've never painted one that was classical colours, apart from that Jenny Savile piece. So once I had painted it, that was when I could kind of start sticking it on. This bit was a little bit scary to start, because obviously once I'd stuck it on, I couldn't really go back. So I had tested it, and this thick yarn couldn't punch through the canvas, as the canvas was a bit too stiff and it would create these big giant holes, and it was awful. So I had the idea to stick each one on, which actually gave me a bit more leniency. It meant that I could create a bit more of a loop with each one, and it gave a bit more of a flow. Once I had done the hair, I had to just close my eyes and go for it with the face, which was a little bit scary to do, but once I started, it was all okay. So I started with the darkest parts, and then also the lightest part. So I started with the eyebrows, with the edge of the nose, and with the top of the forehead, just so I could get myself into it. This part was really, really satisfying. I'm also really, really glad I could sew this one on. I had a bit of a tester because I was a bit scared since this one wouldn't go through, this one might not, but because this one was thin enough and the needle was thin enough, it didn't create super crazy holes, so I was very, very happy with that. So this didn't take me too long. It took me roughly 15 hours to finish the face, which compared to other things that I've created in this piece was very, very good. So I really, really liked doing this one. The only tricky part was behind this nose here it's a bit of a T-bar. It's like a wooden bar behind the canvas. So that was a tiny bit tricky because I had to stick the needle in and then awkwardly pull it out from under the bar, but I managed to work my way around it most times. So once I completed embroidering the face, there were some parts, so the lips, that weren't super detailed. You can slightly see here. And there just wasn't much contrast in the lips, and I just thought it needed something extra. So as well as doing gold beads to enhance the face and give it a bit of sparkle, almost like she's being dripped in gold, I also placed some more bronzy colours underneath in areas that needed a little bit more definition. So you can see I framed the gold in this bronze bead. I've also beaded with the black in her nostrils, the inner bits of her lips, and also her eyes. I was originally going to leave it as the black, but I actually found that it looked a little bit out of place. It looked a bit like someone had chucked caviar on her face. So I thought adding those extra beads make the whole thing pop out a little bit, and it's a great way to link to the background a little bit more. During this time, I had been doing my background at home. So I had essentially traced out the area of the background and then cut it out in the jupe, and then I painted it blue so that if I missed any areas, you couldn't really tell, but I also liked leaving some gaps just to kind of give it a bit more, some bits are up here, some bits are below, so it's a bit more depth in my work. So I would put an embroidery hoop around it just to help me tighten it up a little bit, and I would sew each section, and then once I had finished each section, I would fill in the gaps in between. This background took me a really, really long time because I wanted to make sure the detail was there consistently everywhere, but it was so, so worth it. And this I had been completing even before I had started the face. So this was always going on in the background. This was always, every time I got home from a full day at college, I would do a few more hours on this piece every night. So there was so much effort that went into it. And I'm so happy with how it turned out. And it was just a really, really fulfilling piece to create. So once I finished the background, or half finished it on this image, I just cut out an image of the face that I had done and an image of the background that had been completed thus far, and I just stuck them near each other just so you could get a bit of a look of how it was looking so far, or how it was going to look. 60 hours later, when I finally finished the background and brought it into college, I placed latex on the background so that it would almost stick all of that extra fabric down, just so no mishaps would happen and no beads would fall off, which is, fingers crossed, not going to happen. I then also put in these little bits of thread so that you can see what materials I have used. So once the latex had dried, I absolutely lathered the background and the canvas in wood glue, and I placed it onto it, and then I covered it in books overnight so that it would really, really stick down. So for the shawl, what I did was I started in the smaller areas as I had to cut pieces at exactly the right angle. So you can see here that this is a bit of tracing paper. So what I did was I placed the tracing paper down. I then sketched my pencil around the shape that I needed and then cut that out of here, leaving a little bit of a border. So the border would be so that I could stick it down, it would be the perfect shape, but I could then add pleats so I could pull the fabric up and there would be enough fabric. So the trickiest part was thinking about how much fabric I needed to cut so that there would be enough to create the pleats. So I started with the small bits, and then the last part I did was this big part here, because this was the biggest pleats and it was what was on top of everything. So this one was really, really fun to do. So my technique for this, because after I'd done a little bit, I kind of found a bit of a process. So I stuck it all down, and then I would pull up different parts that I wanted and I would pin them in place whilst the glue dried. Through the whole process, I did feel like I was quite lucky. I mean, nothing really went wrong. It was quite easy to think of my final piece idea. I felt like there wasn't anything challenging, and the good thing about having challenges in your piece is you can overcome them and make your piece better. So I was a little bit concerned that something was going to go wrong, and something did, which I was kind of glad about because I feel like I needed to overcome something. So this jupe here, as I had covered it completely in beads and embroidery, it had all been quite tightened. So when I placed it down on the canvas, I've kind of done a little illustration here. So the jupe covered all of this red square here, so it had shrunk. Luckily, it was right on the edge, so it was quite an easy fix. So what I did was I cut out another little bit of jupe, dyed it blue, embroidered it, and then I made the top part a bit thinner so I could slot it underneath the original part, glue it down, and then it was finished. So I have included a little bit more. We are almost finished, I promise. So I just wanted to make sure that I cover all of my bases. So I've included a technical bits and bobs page. So here we have my completed planner. This I completed throughout my project. It's a bit like a timetable that you write in. So I've got all of my little annotations on each one, including the balloon trip. I'm very excited. I've also included my teacher feedback. I've written down here the gist of it, so you don't have to read all of it, but you can kind of see the bullet points. There were some things that I had to improve on, which I have now done, but I just thought that was a really important thing to include, just so you can see that I considered lots of different things. I've also included my completed checklist. There are just a few things to tick off now, which is just completing my evaluation. But it's quite satisfying to see that everything is ticked off. And then I've also included my midpoint evaluation. The lighter grey parts, I printed it in black and white. It was originally pink, but it came out grey, so hopefully you can see that, but you can see it when I give you the real thing. But I just included it just so you can see my process through creating my evaluation. And that is everything. So thank you very much. Bye.